Welcome to the Digital Defense and Cybersecurity session at GovInsiders Festival of Innovation. We're thrilled to be working with Amazon Web Services who are sponsoring this session. My name is Amit Choudhury. I'm a journalist and your moderator for this very interesting panel discussion. We have been hearing about increasingly sophisticated cyber attacks on networks that have the potential to wreak havoc. We'll be discussing some of those during this panel. As we shall hear from our esteemed participants, robust digital defense and cybersecurity are vital to ensure organizations can keep their networks running. So without further ado, let me introduce our esteemed panelists. We have with us Mihoko Matsubara, Chief Cyber Security Strategist at NTTE. Then we have Gwenda Fong, who is the Assistant Chief Executive Cybersecurity Agency, Singapore. Then Vincent, Assistant Managing Director, Monetary Authority of Singapore. And finally, Andrew Hodges, Senior Security Advisor, Worldwide Public Sector, APJ, Amazon Web Services. So I'll start off by asking my first question to Andrew. Andrew, ease of access, be it to a company network, database, or banking portal, are seen as one of the prerequisites of a digital economy. Does this ease of access also create an obstacle for robust cybersecurity? What is your view on that?
Amit, yeah, great question. Look, I think when we see this, we're dealing with this, which is accelerated in the pandemic government environment, obviously, where we now have many staff in organisations working from home. This has changed the way we build our infrastructure. I'm sure many of you may have been across the term, zero trust, that the National Institute of Standards and Technology published, last year. After being in draft for some time, it talks about the separation, which is really a best practice that AWS has actually observed and conformed to since we started in 2006. Under old models, we would have designed a network around our data centers, hosting our data with a firewall creating the separation. In a way, this is old technology, models almost akin to castles with moats and drawbridges. I often use the example of, keys to the front door of your house. If you enter, you have access to all the rooms inside. With zero trust, we talk about separation inside, only having access to the rooms that you need to have access to. In AWS, we often talk about having access to what you need. Our network design is also built with similar thinking. When even, we go further by determining that keeping humans, whether nefarious actors or just making mistakes as humans do, it should be separate from the data they don't need to have access to, and therefore reduce the risk. We build solutions where applications have access to databases, but not necessarily the humans running totally autonomously by running applications created by humans that execute processing separately from them. The example that I have in AWS is Nitro and Nitro Enclaves, which is an infrastructure that we put in place that runs code to perform a function, but physically separated in its operation from even the administrators, so that only encrypted data is processed. So I think the ease of access profile has been raised, particularly now in a pandemic environment, but it's completely possible to accelerate the design and adopt architecture principles that mitigate much of the risk.
Oh, that's an interesting perspective. Thanks for sharing, Andrew. Anyone else wants to add something to this, what Andrew said? Ease of access while having a robust cyber defense against bad actors?
Sure, Amit. I can jump in and respond with some thoughts to build on Andrew's analogy. I really liked what he said about zero trust and using the analogy of giving someone the keys to the house. If you didn't have zero trust, whoever had access to the house can roam freely. But with zero trust, a very simple way of thinking about it is I'll use an example. So if you have, say, a carpentry job that needs to be done, you let a carpenter in your house because you know that he is there for a legit function. Zero trust means that you have to question every activity that he does in the house. Then if you suddenly find a carpenter like cooking in your kitchen, that should, raise some alarm bells, because as a carpenter, he should be, in whichever room fixing the furniture, and he shouldn't find a carpenter cooking in the kitchen. So that's an example of how you need to detect for suspicious activity, even beyond having gone past the perimeter within the house. You need to look for these different anomalous or suspicious activity. So that's a layman kind of example that we like to use just to illustrate the point of zero trust. But I think Andrew was extremely on points with that. Thank you.
Great.
Can I be a little bit more controversial here?
Yeah, sure, please
okay.
do.
Forgive me, my fellow panelists, and thank you very much for this invitation anyway. Actually, for me personally, I think I totally agree with what Andrew and Gwenda say, but I'm not going to include more people inside the house. So what I want to say is basically that actually there is a conflict, because when we talk about zero trust, which means that you need to re-authenticate. And the world has changed, to be fair, and those were the basic when we started with technology. And the world has evolved because there was a lot of customer centricity to make life easier for the customer. And you have straight-through processing along the way. And along the way, there will always be, if you want to have zero trust, there will be time where user experience will be affected. And what I'm trying to bring across is that there will always be a conflict between security and user centricity. There is a trade-off. And it would be, I think, naive to say that there is no trade-off. But I think that, but it doesn't mean that the world cannot live on. Okay, it is just like driving a car in a road. Okay, you have traffic light that you have to follow, whether you like it or not. And I think that zero trust, well, is very useful, and I totally agree with that. But I think that we cannot hide from the fact that there are trade-off decisions that has to be made. And this decision has to be made together with the whole ecosystem, which means the company, the customer, and also the supplier all needs to come together. Thank you.
That's a great point, Vincent. Mikio, you want to add anything on this aspect? Hello, Mikio, you want to add any point on this?
Oh, Miho.
Miko, sorry, my bad, sorry.
Sure. So can I, if I may, I'd like to go back to what Andrew pointed out. So what has changed after we started to be more reliant on IT due to the increasing number of remote workers. So we naturally spend more time online and using webinars and online meetings, and such as we are doing right now. And it actually changed our behavior online. So the Forbes reported that the ratio to click phishing or spear phishing emails jumped from 5% to 40% after the pandemic started. So it's a huge change, and we obviously have expanded the attack surface to different types of attackers. So we obviously need more cyber defense, including zero trust, and we also need to raise our cybersecurity awareness. But unfortunately, NTT Limited found out that only 43% of global companies have provided cybersecurity training for remote workers as of summer 2020. So that is why Trend Micro found really scary statistics that only 20% of remote workers say that they will never use their work laptop for personal ends, such as online shopping. And more number of people actually uploaded their work data to non-work applications. And we obviously need to start to change our remote workers' behavior. So I'd like to share what my company is doing to raise cybersecurity awareness and to do cybersecurity best practices. So NTT Group has over 320,000 employees around the world, including Singapore and Japan. And our NTT Global CISO, Shinichi Yokohama, started to disseminate regular cybersecurity newsletters in Japanese and English to every single NTT employees to share the latest cyber threat landscape and also the basic concept of cybersecurity best practices. And he also started to launch a mandatory and on-demand online cybersecurity awareness training covering different types of threats, including ransomware attacks. And he also made sure that that training is interesting, not boring, so that everybody would make sure to finish and then remember everything he's gonna say in that training. So I think that now, of course, we need to have technologies to ensure the zero trust and the cybersecurity to protect our more vulnerable IT environment, including our remote working IT environment. But I think we also need to have some human touch to make sure that the cybersecurity training is interesting and engaging, because we are now more stressed and staring at the more screen more than ever during this pandemic.
Thank you so much. Now, I'm just going to take this discussion slightly in a different aspect here. We talked about zero trust, which is a very good mechanism for, sort of preventing the bad guys from entering. And we also talked about how remote work and the need to retrain remote workers because of this current pandemic situation and the high level of stress, if I may say it so. But if I were to just take this a bit further and a more helicopter view, to say, I'd like to ask this question to Andrew first, and then Vincent. From your perspective, your organization, can you give a broad overview of what you think are the top priorities for cybersecurity? I mean, I'm not just talking about zero trust, which is a mechanism of preventing cybersecurity, but what are the issues? Ransomware, then phishing attacks, APTs, the big picture, what is happening? Andrew, you want to start off?
Yeah, look, again, a great question, and I really like Mihoko's comments around the relationship about people being involved in it. I think when I look at even areas like zero trust, it's taking into account how we would look at architecting, and our CISO has given examples of all of the areas that I think that there are 10 sort of top areas that we've discovered that companies are generally making mistakes and could actually benefit from making some significant changes to that. But the bit that I think Mihoko was talking about was the human aspect to this, which obviously becomes a very important component of what we're actually talking about. So building a security culture, cybersecurity culture in your organization is important. When I look at the threats, if we understood what the bad actors are actually trying to to achieve, we've got them actually driving in some main areas. Whether it's espionage, whether it's notorious or nefarious actors actually trying to gain notoriety in a variety of other areas, and then look at how we position the kinds of attacks that are actually occurring. The ones that do occur quite frequently are simple ones like social engineering issues and also insider threat components, which insider threats don't necessarily need to be bad people either. They can be staff that are just making mistakes, or in the case of the pandemic, using your business applications from home with other people using the same Wi-Fi in the house and those sorts of things that actually can create some challenges. So I think the social engineering aspect to it is the greatest, and making fundamental mistakes which we see that are being used. Things like passwords that Vincent mentioned before, not using MFA and those sorts of components to it. But also responding to the social engineering. I mean, if you look at a hacker dimension, the first thing that they do from a cyber kill chain perspective is to, do reconnaissance. So they're actually trying to create the breach even before it actually gets down to the technology that you might be using, by maybe ringing up and reporting to be the local bank or something like that that needs details so that they can assess it. Or it might be SMS alerts that are occurring lately, and even the the ransomware attacks that that are occurring. So I think the big issue is, for me anyway, I think is not so much the technology, although that's a very key part of how we remediate a lot of this. It's actually how we deal with the people and create that culture in the organization, so that the humans we are know what is actually going on and the areas that need to be considered before we just dive in.
Okay, thanks. Great response, Andrew. Thanks for sharing. Vincent, you want to add anything to Andrew's points?
Okay, thank you. I'm not going to talk about people, since Andrew and Mihoko has actually spent a lot of time talking about people. And I reflect on my role in MAS, which I have a two role. One is an internal role. I'm responsible for all the technology within MAS, including the payment system in Singapore that holds our payment system. I also have an external role, which means that I'm ultimately the regulator responsible for financial services in terms of technology and cyber risk. And I think people is important. There are many things that make me worry at night and lose my sleep. But there are three things that I do worry about at the moment. One is supply chain, specifically about cloud. Sorry, Andrew, I know you're in the cloud business, but I do think that there are issues. Let me put it very clearly, is that I've said it very clearly from MAS point of view. There is a purpose in cloud, and I think that the future is with cloud. Okay, the financial services sector or most sector require cloud in the future. Okay, but having said that, we need to go there with an open eye, which means that we need to be mindful of the risk that cloud or any third-party supplier brings to us. And I don't think that the world is as sharp or the world is as coordinated in regards to this risk. Okay, so that's one. Secondly is the war of talent. I know cybersecurity is one of the top two agenda in most senior management. I'll be surprised if any senior management tell me that they are not. But I do worry about this euphoria about cybersecurity. Everybody's converting themselves to cybersecurity, whatever they can think of. And that creates, there is a lot of fight for talent. And I just worry that how many of them are good talents and how many of them are really real people who can actually sort out the problem. Okay, and I think that in this rush for talent, everybody said they are talent. How to make sure that the important institutions are actually managed by good cyber people who actually understand the issue, who understand how to deal with the risk. Okay, so and one of the things I've been in cyber for a long time, what I realized that it's very easy to understand the big picture, but the devil is in the detail. You need to go down to the detail. Which sometimes I think is quite lacking in some areas. Last but not least, I think, as Andrew said, if you look at all the cyber attack in terms of ransomware and all this thing, at the end of the day, it is pure cyber hygiene. The 6 or 7 things, basic things that people have not done. We have done an analysis, nearly 90% or 95% of cyber incidents are pure basic cyber hygiene that people never get it sorted out. So those are the 3 things that I worry about as a regulator and also as a user of technology. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Mihoko, you want to add add to these 2 very interesting points?
Sure. So I think we the urgent task we have to tackle with is vulnerability management. So I'm not just talking about the technology vulnerabilities, but also the human vulnerabilities. So first, technologies. So now we are more reliant on newer technologies, including cloud-based applications. But we are not necessarily really good at doing application security or cloud security, especially for conservative companies and government bodies. So we, the threat actors exactly know where they need to exploit. So they are now more targeting vulnerabilities such as remote desktop protocols and VPN servers. So we need to tackle with those challenges, and also human vulnerabilities. So now we are more stressed, and some people unfortunately are furloughed and pushed out of their work during this pandemic and economic downturn. And now what? Cyber threat actors are now more using social media platforms to launch social engineering campaigns to launch cyber espionage. And some of the attacks are targeting COVID-19 vaccine companies and researchers. So what we need to do is to fix on patch vulnerabilities in terms of technologies, but also to give cybersecurity training for those remote workers.
Thank you. Gwenda, you want to add something? Because I have the next question for you, but in this line of, you want to add anything on?
I'll maybe add 2 quick points. I completely agree with what my 3 fellow panelists have said, but maybe just to add 2 main points. One is over the past 18 months, as companies have digitalized very, very quickly, sometimes almost overnight, that was necessary because they needed to, make sure that their businesses could survive. But I think what business leaders didn't always fully understand was the risks that they were taking on as well, right? So by digitalizing your attack surface and what you're exposed to is much wider. And I'm not sure that the cyber or the security components were really thought of at the same time as they were digitalizing. So that's probably something that I think organizations do need to be mindful of, the risk that they are taking on as they go digital. Second, I completely agree with what the 3 panelists have all said about the human component. And I like to kind of always frame this in terms of 3 A's. There needs to be awareness of the issue, right from the top, from the business leaders down to the employees, the IT teams, and everyone, up and down the chain. So there needs to be awareness. The second A is attitudes. The attitudes needs to change such that they don't see it as a business cost. They see they understand the severity of it. They understand how it's core to protecting business interests and reputation. And the third A is then it needs to drive adoption. So it's not good enough just to be aware of the threats. They need to take it seriously, and then they need to do something about it. Easy to say, but really difficult to do. But I think that's what business leaders really need to think about. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks. But just carrying on on this discussion, what about how is it possible to create a robust digital system while ensuring ease of access that is a prerequisite for a digital society that we strive to create in smart cities and smart nations?
I think Vincent touched on this a little bit earlier in his comments to the first question. He talked about how there's this tension, between the innovation and the usability versus the security that needs to be put in place. So I completely agree. There is a tension between, if you want to create a smart city, a digital economy, there needs to be a lot of innovation. We want to encourage people to uptake and use these digital technologies. But at the same time, you need to make sure that cybersecurity is an enabler for this digital economy. And securing the systems really creates this trust in the digital domain. And it's extremely critical because without this trust, even though you have all these like digital tools that are great, but if there are increasingly kind of frequent cyber breaches, cyber attacks, very soon users will not feel safe or confident transacting online and carrying out their daily activities online. So we see cybersecurity really as a core to kind of preserve this trust. But how do we do that? There is no absolute security. If some of us in the cyber world, we like to say that the most secure computer is the one that's still in its box and it's unopened, right? So there isn't 100% security. The minute it's plugged in, there will be certain risks. So the key issue that I think Vincent also touched on earlier is this idea of a trade-off. How do you ensure a sufficient amount of security, yet with a high level of usability, functionality, and at what cost? So this is a trilemma that we think about: security, usability, or functionality, and cost. And it is like it's almost impossible to optimize for all three at the same time, right? The analogy I like to give is, let's say you want to buy a house. You want to buy a big house, you want to buy a house in a good location, and you want to buy a cheap house. Such a house does not exist. You cannot get a big house in a good location for a low cost. So something has to give. And what is that balance point? And I think the key thing is to recognize that it is a trade-off, and the trade-off cannot be taken at, by purely the IT team in the back room. The trade-off decisions is a boardroom, a C-suite level discussion where they need to understand what is right for the business. There isn't a single right solution for every business. It depends on the nature of the business, the types of risk that they are exposed to, and therefore where this risk or where this balance point sits is a strategic decision that needs to be discussed at the right level of management.
Yeah, thanks, Gwenda. That's a very important point. It has to be a trade-off, and this trade-off has to be done from the top level. It cannot be a CISO decision anymore. So would the other panelists like to add on these very interesting points? Andrew, you want to come in?
Yeah, look, I think, Amit, that, Glenda and actually Vincent have raised some very, very interesting points. I think one of the challenges that, we have with, in a digital society, and of course, when we look at innovation, and I have, done other presentations in relation to, dealing with myths and opportunities, and I specify the opportunities because as Glenda alluded to, innovation is obviously one of the, the risk challenges. If you're not prepared to take a level of risk as you implement new areas, it becomes a bit of a challenge. And it's not just about what the CISOs would normally talk about, risk transference and as an option. Having the executives really focus on what they actually need to do is important, particularly when we look at the digital society that we're living in now. We're also dealing with a whole lot of different devices, whether it's IoT devices and and technologies that have emerged. How do we actually wrap that into to what we're dealing with? Autonomous devices, that are being put in place. So I do think there's some significant benefit in turning around and trying to deal with those areas head up. I mean, an example, for instance, years ago, I went flew into Houston, and basically at the airport they have building management system, and of course there's sensors all around the place. And if you looked at one of those sensors, it has an RJ45 socket on it. So in actual fact, there's a good chance that the people that implemented this may never have actually changed the default passwords in that. And if I was a hacker, I could just basically plug into it and have control of the whole network. It's something that we're actually dealing with, on a daily basis. So I actually think that the points that Glenda made are really, very valid in terms of how we drive innovation, and at the same time, take on new challenges, but at the same time, consider the risk metrics that we're dealing with.
Oh, that's great. Vincent, you want to add anything? Vincent, I think you're mute. You got mute.
Yeah, sorry about that.
No, that's all right.
We struggle in financial services because we are fintech. Mm-hmm. And I think that one of the things that we have done pretty well, touch wood, is that we allow innovation to go forward, because we don't. The last thing as regulator is to front run innovation. We need innovation to move forward, and we just observe it at the site. But at one point, we keep asking them to do a risk assessment, to go there with an eye open. Doesn't mean that you want to control them, because there are certain risks that you can take. Up to a certain point, you know that when they do innovation, there's a risk involved and things will fall. It's not going to be 100% and things will happen. But if this thing happens, it's fine. We can live with it in the bigger scheme of things. But after a certain point in time, and that's why regularly you have to do some risk assessment, not with a big template, with a very pragmatic risk assessment in terms of understanding the risk as they innovate. And once you come to a certain point that you think that you can't live with the risk, then you start to put regulation on top of it. And that's what we have been doing in MES. We have been extremely careful not to front-run innovation, because we are definitely not going to be in front of the innovation. We need the innovation to move the industry. And that is actually our core principle within MES. But we are also very certain that we want to make sure that we manage this risk properly. But to do that, you need to work with innovation, understand them, okay? But don't clamp down immediately, and be prepared to make sure that there are some that are prepared that things will go down, but it doesn't matter. It is part of the learning process. And that has always helped us. In the last few years. I hope it will continue to help us going forward. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Mihoko, you want to add your experience dealing with companies all across the globe and how they are, sort of dealing with the challenges?
Sure. So to achieve secure digital society, and also to ensure the secured smart cities, we need to make sure to have good risk management, and also supply chain risk management, as Vincent pointed out earlier today. But the problem is that we now face geopolitical tensions in the world. And it also complicates how to pursue the supply chain risk management. And also, we also have to have a good balance between the usability and security, and as Gwenda pointed out. So that is why we need to have a good market competition and flexibility to choose different vendors. So we have to have to pursue innovations. But to do that, we have to have a good collaboration, a good balanced collaboration between the different sectors and also between the different countries. So I think this webinar is wonderful to bring together different people from different sectors and different countries to talk about it.
Yeah, actually, I want to just follow on that question, Mihoko. You've been talking about geopolitical factors behind cybersecurity. I mean, I think that is the 800-pound gorilla in the room that we just can't ignore. It's not invisible anymore. A good example has been the recent Colonial Pipeline attack in the US and the US government's response to that. And, what it has shown, apart from the political aspects of both the attack as well as the response, what it has shown is a critical information infrastructure is vital, and these must never go down. And since they are so vital and must never go down, they become juicy targets. So generally, what is your view on this from a broader perspective? I'm going to ask all the panelists on this, but I wanted to ask you first.
So before the I think that the Colonial Pipeline ransomware attack is a paradigm shifting event, because we used to think that ransomware attack is just about money and also to business disruptions, but we never saw that a cyber criminal group can create this level of huge devastating damages to different sectors, and also a grave damage to not only economic security, but also national security. So that is why I think that President Biden strongly reacted, and he himself provided multiple press conferences to talk about the grave threats posed by ransomware attacks. So I think that what we need to think about we need to take new approaches toward ransomware attacks. We also have to ensure each critical infrastructure sectors have to defend better themselves. But also we have to think about cross impact between different sectors, because this ransomware attack hit energy sector, and energy sector is connected to transportation, electricity, and also national security and economic security. So I think that we need to think about, okay, so what if this type of ransomware attack hit this specific sector, then what kind of consequences we would see in different sectors in this country. So then we need to cyber exercise scenario to bring in different sectors and also different regulatory bodies of the government.
Great, thanks. Andrew, you want to add anything to very good points raised by Mihoko?
Yeah, look, I think that they were absolutely very good points, and I'm not going to, to duplicate, those. And I look at the Colonial Pipeline, attack. There were some characteristics that were, I think, fairly standard across the board. We're still dealing with, broken passwords or shared passwords. And absence of MFAs and those sorts of things that, from a technology perspective, could have been, implemented. And, and if I look back on some of the previous statements that I've made also, it's still relevant to that. The challenge, I think, is is dealing with with ransomware, and that you're right. It becomes down to perhaps policy policy issues and how the attacks are occurring. One thing that I'll just make an observation is that one of the things that we've been looking out for is maybe not necessarily the attacks on ransomware, although it's obviously a significant revenue opportunity. We're also seeing and we talk to our customers a lot about, infrastructure perhaps focused on Bitcoin mining that might be occurring in other regions of, of the customer. So if their main business is here in Singapore, is there a reason for them to be deploying services that might be occurring in say Ireland region or something like that? So there are some other challenges that we're looking at, but I do think that an approach to dealing with it, and also looking again at the infrastructure that you got as a significant, I guess, remediation activity that can occur.
Yeah, thanks. Gwenda, Vincent, you want to add anything specific on this aspect?
Maybe Glenda, let me interject, and then you can come in after that. Is that all right with you, Glenda? Thank you. So I've got 2 points. Okay, one to reinforce Andrew's point. Ransomware is just one way of attack. In a few months' time or a few years' time, there will be another attack. Okay, we need to look through the veil of all this attack, and at the end of the day, it is a standard method of attacking people vulnerability, and then after that, system vulnerability. Okay, the malware with that. Okay, and so I think that at the end of the day, what is important is the basic cyber hygiene is important. Second one, I just want to pivot it a little bit in regards to your conversation, is that this is a global problem. Okay, and I think that unfortunately there is a bifurcation in regards to technology out there. This is a real world that we are living, but at the end of the day, it's about trust, and trust needs to build multi-generation and multi-years. Okay, and I thought that I wanted to comment earlier before Glenda, because I think that what CSA has done has been quite impressive internationally and locally in terms of getting the whole ecosystem to create that trust, which is a journey. Over to you, Glenda. Now you know why I wanted to do it for you.
Thanks, Vincent. Maybe just to backtrack a bit and say that we are concerned about ransomware because we see certain step changes, I suppose, in the trend that ransomware is taking. First, in the past, ransomware tended to be fairly isolated and sporadic, affecting individuals or a handful of computers and companies. But over time, we see that they have the cyber criminals have really kind of refined their tactics, and now they encrypt or lock up hundreds, if not thousands, of computers simultaneously. So that is they're hitting big organizations, and that is clearly an issue. The other thing that we're really concerned about is the real-world impact or implications of the threat. It's no longer just about encrypting data, but it has a physical, real-world kind of manifestation. So what we call the cyber-physical nexus. Vincent is right. It is a global problem. It's a whole ecosystem around ransomware that many people are still trying to understand and study, and what can different parts, whether it's a national cyber authority or the financial regulator or the police enforcement, we need to come together to understand what the ecosystem is and how we each hold different levers that could perhaps affect or shape the behavior of different parts of the ecosystem. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done, not just within Singapore, but with international partners as well. I would say though, something that enterprises can do to kind of better protect themselves. Ransomware, ultimately, the best thing that they can do is prevention, right? A lot of what we talked about is cyber hygiene and taking steps to reduce the vulnerability so they don't fall victim in the first place. But something else that they can do, even if they were to fall victim, what they can do, firstly, it's not to pay ransom. We don't encourage people to pay ransom because we believe that, these are cyber criminals, right? So if you just pay ransom, you're going to encourage further bad behavior. Secondly, if you pay ransom, you're not sure that your data will be decrypted in the first place. And also, you could be seen as a soft target, like a willing, an easy victim. So you're likely to be, attacked again and again because they know that you're going to pay. So instead, what we suggest is firstly take the preventive measures, but also for enterprises to back up their data regularly and keep their backups offline, such that if they were to fall victim, it's not too painful. They don't lose everything. They can quite easily restore the backups and resume their operations. So these are just some practical steps, not too difficult to do, that we think organizations can take to better protect themselves. Thanks.
Thanks. Actually, while listening to all of your very insightful comments, I was just thinking, we're talking about digital defense and cybersecurity here. And we've, of course, we all understand that technology plays a big, important part in, creating robust cyber defense. But we've also heard that the human element also needs to be addressed, because that is the big unknown in this equation of cyber defense. So we've heard about good cyber hygiene, and we've also heard about good cybersecurity professionals. So here we have two issues here, and I just want to throw this to anyone who would like to take this question up. Is that on the one hand, we have a global shortage of good cybersecurity professionals, and that shortage is growing and not unlikely to be met anytime soon. And we still have people who, especially in this age of remote working, whose cyber hygiene needs to be corrected with education, whether it's fun-filled, as Mihoko has mentioned, or whichever way. So essentially, on the one hand, we know the technology has to be spot on with zero trust and other things. But on the other hand, what do you do with the human factor? How do you tackle it, both in the short term and the medium term? And do you want to start first?
Yeah, look, absolutely, Amit. And I think Vincent was quite right. When we look at the fact that we do have a significant shortage of professionals that can deal with well-rounded cybersecurity abilities. But I also think that there's an area, and this is where we talk, even in our company around, security being job zero. And it doesn't matter whether you're an account manager or anything like that. It's understanding the mindset that you're actually dealing with. And, and I think, Mihoko mentioned before about the importance of humans and the involvement of humans. And when we look at some of the attacks that are actually occurring, I still think that that a lot of it is is broadening your understanding of the individuals, the constituents of your organization or the general public in terms of how we mitigate, those risks. I'll give you an example. I did a presentation quite a few years ago, actually, at a primary school level, where we were talking about the typical hygiene. Now, an interesting concept was that and I won't mention which school it was, but it was done for MOE, and and we were talking to students, and before we actually did the presentation, I started asking them about whether we should talk about social networking and those sorts of things like Facebook, etc. in there, and and the principal actually said to me, no, these are primary school kids. They don't actually get involved in Facebook because they're they're too young to be creating accounts. Well, I mean, that I think is not a good judgment, because we know the reality is kids actually do get involved. And even, I was on Facebook a few years ago, and people were actually sharing data that I just consider inappropriate, like IC numbers, or their IC. My child actually got their driver's license, and, and suddenly they're posting that information. This, if you think about the breadth of this and the fact that you're dealing with, people around that can't necessarily or may not necessarily have controlled the privacy of their infrastructure, you're actually expanding the base. And it's the same in I think in a work, a work environment or in a home environment. There are a whole lot of things that we can do to look at what is not considered reasonable behavior. And if we go back to, what I've talked about before, things like password hygiene and those aspects, these are all ways of creating the vehicle that nefarious actors can use to actually create the breaches that we're dealing with. So I still think that there's a strong opportunity, not necessarily to focus purely on, acquiring the cybersecurity experts, but having a culture within your organizations and generally in the community that understands the challenges. And I know, you've only got to look at Crime Watch, here in Singapore to see some of the things that we're actually having to deal with, on a daily basis. All of this can manifest itself into, into compliance issues in relation to, how we're dealing with the infrastructure.
Okay, thanks, Andrew. I mean, we are almost running out of time, and I know Vincent needs to go very fast at exactly at 11:20. So I'll just ask the rest three of you to give quick points of view on this particular issue. Vincent, you want to start first, and we'll all excuse you if you need to rush after that. Vincent, you're
muted, Vincent.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much for this opportunity. Let me conclude by I totally agree with Andrew and all the fellow panelists here. When we talk about people, this is a multi-generation, again, a journey that we have to go through. It is human frailty that we are dealing with. Just like when we all say that we try to change, well, when we have a kid, we know, we talk about how to teach the kid to grow up to be a wonderful human being, but you never know. Nobody got a perfect kid yet. Tell me who has a perfect kid. Yeah. That's what human is all about. Okay, what is important is 80-20 rules. Is that we will have a culture. Hopefully, most of the people get it, but obviously 20% will not get it. But it's fine. Okay, it's more people doing it, there will be incidents that happen. Everybody that we influence, everybody in the ecosystem that we influence will sort of raise the standard in terms of cybersecurity. That's all I have to say on that. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks, Vincent. And if you need to go do, it's been a pleasure talking to you and great having you on the panel. So I'll just quickly go to Gwenda, if you want to give some closing remarks.
Yeah, thanks. I think, I was reflecting on what Andrew said, and on the last question, I think the main issue or challenge that we have today is that in our population that we have today, not everyone was a digital native, right? Most of us are actually digital immigrants. All of us on the panel today, I would hazard, are digital immigrants, meaning we did not grow up with digital technologies, so we did not learn how to keep ourselves safe, cyber hygiene and all that. It didn't come naturally, and because our parents didn't have that, they didn't teach that to us, and we are learning it ourselves now. Versus the kids who grow up today, the millennials, they know how to, you know, operate digitally. The instincts come, they are more mindful of what it is. So I think Vincent is right. It's a multi-generational thing where right now we need to teach people what it means to be safe online. What does it mean not to post your IC number? Why is it not safe? Cyber wellness and all those sorts of things. So over time, I believe that as people, you know, physical safety, public like hygiene, all those are ingrained in us, and we all know now after a year of COVID, we know to wash our hands, we know to wear a mask. It takes education, it takes some time to basically build that culture. Over time, I think we will get there. Right now, I do see it as in a transition phase, but it is a fairly long transition because we're talking about generations of people. So what needs to be done now is just a lot of outreach, repeated kind of nagging and telling people this is how you stay safe. But that's what needs to be done.
Okay, thanks, Gwenda. Mihiko, closing remarks?
Sure. So the ISC Square estimates that the world is short of over 3 million cybersecurity professionals as of today. So to increase cybersecurity pipeline, we need to make 2 types of efforts. So first, as Andrew mentioned, Vincent said that we have to have education and training for multi-generations. And B, we also need to have next generation pipelines at school level education to create cybersecurity professionals. But we also have to be very open and flexible to accommodate those who want to change their career, such as from IT to cybersecurity. So we have to also provide additional cybersecurity training for mid-career professionals, so that we can make sure that we can tackle with different types of problems from legal to technicals and the human management and the business issues.
Okay, thank you, Mihiko. I mean, I think we've all overshot our allotted time, and the next panel is going to come in very soon. So a big thank you to all our panelists, and Vincent had to leave a bit early because he has another engagement. And we had a wonderful discussion, and I hope the audience got something interesting to take back from this panel discussion, where a lot of useful insights were shared. And you know, I hope the audience stays back, because we have another very interesting discussion, driving operation excellence with the power of compute on cloud, starting at 11:30. So do stay tuned in for that. And for the panelists, thank you all. And it's been a pleasure and honor for me to moderate this panel, and hope to see you guys soon. So bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Amit. Thanks, team
thank you.
members.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.